Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We have been looking at Contact Report 150, and at the end of the last show, I kind of left you hanging, and I'm still hanging there in the same position. Well, we were talking about the Destroyer Comet, that large comet that has come through our system at various times in the past, and I read a special event here that's mentioned by Quetzal, where the destroyer ripped 7 large asteroids from the asteroid belt, casting them into various dangerous orbits, which in coming times will endanger the Earth. And we are said that we'll probably be endangered in 2014 by one of these. Well, we haven't yet. However, in 2013, there were a whole series of asteroids that hit Russia. So that's about as far as we know. But the special event was a large asteroid that crashed into the Indian Ocean, which caused a deluge around 9,792 BC. And we were documenting these special events that occurred because of this destroyer comet. Remember, the destroyer comet used to go into the Lyrian, the Lyra-Vega systems, and it would send the ancient Lyra-Vegan civilization back hundreds, if not thousands of years because of all the damage it would do. It slammed into a large planet at one point in the Lyra-Vega system and broke off a piece of that planet. And that broken piece of that planet eventually ended up here in our solar system and became our moon. So that's how we got our moon, and that's why the moon is millions of years older than the Earth. There was another deluge in 9,545 BC, according to Contact 150. So every time this destroyer comet would come through, a lot of times something horrific would happen, like a flood. So according to Meier material, there have been numerous global floods. The special event here describes seven large asteroids, again, from the asteroid belt, reach Earth's orbit and crash into the world's oceans. One in the North Sea, one in the Indian Ocean, one in the Chinese Sea, one in the sea off the southeast coast of Australia, one in the Atlantic, and one in the Pacific, producing a huge deluge on a worldwide scale. That was in 9,545 BC. Another one of these special events occurred in 9,186 BC, where Halley's Comet disturbs the Earth's rotation and leaves the planet in a particle trail. So the Earth was in a particle trail from Halley's Comets that lasted 32 days. So, again, I just wanted to kind of touch base where we were last time, and we'll be back to Contact 150, I do think. So let me jump, and I'm jumping a little bit all over the place lately in my studies, and I'm back to the Goblet of Truth, which is a book we've talked about before. Let me just briefly mention something about Bily's writings in general. He has over 500 contact notes now, and these are, I call booklets. The smallest one being about a page long, the largest one being up to 100 pages. And they document these contacts he's had with these extraterrestrial humans. These contacts go all the way back to 1945, when he was a small boy growing up in Bülach, Switzerland, where he first met with Thoth in 1945. And I've talked about that many times before, and I will mention it again. But in Contact 150, Bily was speaking with a man named Quetzal, a Plejaren man who was ahead of all of the stations in our solar system. He was, at that time, not an Ishwish declared yet, but eventually he would come to the level of the Ishwish, or King of Wisdom, which is a person at a very high level of evolvement, a person who was an expert in some given field of study, whether it's computer science or the spiritual teachings. Bily has met with 5 or 6 of these individuals. The first was Thoth. The second was Asket. Those were his 2 original mentors. He met with both of those for 11 years. He met with Semjase in 1975, and those contacts continued up to about 1979, when Semjase suffered a severe head injury. Since then, she's been still healing from that injury, and Bily will probably not have any more contacts with her during his lifetime. And then his two contacts with Quetzal and Ptah picked up. And that's where Contact 150 kind of fills in. And Contact 150 is about, well, it's some 80 pages long when I printed it out. Some of these contact notes are, like I said, short, maybe one page. And other ones are hundreds of pages long. So this is just a massive body of work that Edward Albert Meier has put together. One of his largest writings is called The Goblet of Truth, maybe 600-700 pages long. And I wanted to pick up in a section on The Goblet of Truth, which talks about Merlin, King Arthur, a person named Keridwena. And let me read this passage, and then I will go over a whole, what I consider to be very, very interesting information here. And therefore, this truth is also given in the book entitled The Goblet of Truth, a first part of which, namely the teaching of Henoch, was also called the Cauldron of Life by a Druid prince, Merlin, alias Merlin. Okay. Merlin was a Druid prince. He was a teacher, a doctor, a prophet, a historian. The Druids were part of a wealthy kind of a professional class which existed in England and in Ireland. And they started somewhere around the Iron Age. And the Iron Age goes back pretty far to about 1200 BC and lasted, after the 6th or 7th century. The Iron Age came after the Bronze Age. And Merlin is known as this kind of legendary figure from the story of King Arthur's times. He was not a wizard or a magician. Merlin had studied the teachings of Henoch. He had gotten a hold of a scroll at some point and was very taken with the teachings of Henoch, and he really studied these. Now, who was Henoch? Henoch is one of the 6 personalities of the spirit form of Edward Albert Meier, which is incarnated as Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. Now, the person we call Enoch, the Meier material calls Henoch, and I think that was his real name. And there were actually 3 Henochs. The first Henoch was here around 13,500 years ago, roughly during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. The second Henoch came about 9,000 years ago and wrote the Henoch prophecies, which we've talked about in depth. And then Henoch the third was about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. So Merlin had probably gotten a hold of some of the teachings of Henoch II, which dealt with prophecies. And Merlin had learned to start meditating, and he became a very effective meditator and became very skillful, as did his father. And he started to actually develop some what we would call paranormal abilities to a degree, which are actually probably somewhat normal. He became a seer, a visionary, and he could look into the future and see certain events that would take place. Now, this led the Christian world to falsely think that he was influenced by the devil. But again, this visionary ability came from his meditations. Some of these prophecies that Merlin came up with can be found in an ancient manuscript called Prophetae Merlinae, and the prophecies of Merlin were written down by this Welsh cleric around 1135 AD. In one prophecy of Merlin, he saw 2 dragons fighting, a red one and a white one. And Merlin replies that the red dragon meant the British race and the white dragon meant the Saxons. and he said the Saxons would be victorious in this battle. Now, Merlin, there was other legends written about Merlin, which I don't think necessarily the Meier material supports, but one interesting manuscript says that Merlin was involved in the construction of Stonehenge. Merlin had met some giant, evidently, and had help creating the burial place of Stonehenge. And if you want the full story of Merlin, you go to Contact 469 on the Future of Mankind site. Now, Merlin was given a very powerful sword that was falsely later called Excalibur. Its real name was, I'll try to pronounce it, Caladfluch, which meant lightning sword, because it emitted these lightning rays. And this light ray weapon was forged in a place called the Isle of Avalon, under the guidance of an extraterrestrial woman, a Pleiadian woman named Keridwena. Keridwena was actually the great aunt of Ptah, and she gave this lightning sword weapon to Merlin because she trusted Merlin and thought he would put it to good use. Now, Merlin, unfortunately, turned and gave the weapon to King Arthur. And King Arthur is not the person that's depicted in some of our writings. King Arthur fought many bloody battles with this weapon. And it wasn't until the death of King Arthur that Merlin got this weapon back. And he eventually gave the weapon back to Keridwena, the Pleiadian who left the earth after time. Now, King Arthur was not a good-hearted king as he's depicted today. He was actually a fierce war king who led his many bloodthirsty knights into all kinds of battles and raids. King Arthur was also called the Boar of Cornwall, and he became a pupil of Merlin, at least for 7 years. Arthur was known as a brutal and stubborn man for whom human life didn't mean much of anything, really, and he ruled in the late 5th and early 6th centuries. Now, the Goblet of Truth here is talking about Henoch and Merlin, and I just gave you that little bit of history, and you can read more in Contact 469. The actual castle that Merlin lived in was called Dinas Bran, and it was a medieval castle standing on a hill above a town in Wales. So Merlin was a student of, we could say a student of the Meier material in a sense, because he was studying some of the writings of Henoch. Anyway, the Goblet of Truth goes on here to explain that Merlin called the Henoch writings, he, for one reason or another, called them the Cauldron of Life. And this Cauldron of Life wasn't related any way to what has been called the Holy Grail of Christianity. And the Holy Grail didn't collect the blood of Emmanuel / Jesus at his crucifixion. The Holy Grail was actually a place. And it was a spring surrounded by trees and plants where the Druids would do their meditations. The Grail was never a cup that caught the blood of Christ, but it does appear in the literature of King Arthur as a dish, a plate, a stone, or a cup. And it's interwoven with certain legends of this holy chalice, and there's a connection between it, supposedly in these legends, with Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea, according to all of the four canonical Gospels, was the man who donated his own prepared tomb for the burial of Christ. Now, probably in some ways the most controversial of the Meier-related writings is a writing that Bily didn't actually do himself. He corrected a translation. There is a writing called the Talmud of Emmanuel, which is a translation of an ancient Aramaic scroll. This translation was done by Isa Rashid, a Greek Orthodox priest who was eventually killed. Him and his family were gunned down by the Mossad, and the original manuscript was burned. A portion of the manuscript, a fairly large portion, was translated from Aramaic into German. Eventually, Bily translated the German, clarified the German, corrected the German translation, and there's even a new one out to this day. There's also a translation being done of the Talmud of Emmanuel today, a new one being done into English, and maybe I get a chance at reading that at some point. But we'll have to go over the story of Emmanuel in a little more detail at some other time. But this was another incarnation of these 6 prophets who have been here on the earth in the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of life. That was one of the things I wanted to talk about this afternoon. I thought this was a very interesting story, and I'm sure we'll cover this in a little more detail in the future. I wanted to step back and again talk a little bit about how it all began. Bily Edward Albert Meier is a farmer who lives in Switzerland. He lives in a tiny mountain village called Hinterschmidruti. When he was growing up in 1945 in Bily, Switzerland, he received his first contacts from a man named Spoth. He would get these telepathic messages to go out into the Oregon forest and wait. But even before Bily met with Spoth, he had a very interesting experience at one time, 3 a.m. in the morning, mid-morning, on a mild night in May in 1941. He crawled out a lower window in his bedroom and sat down on a bench and looked up at a beautiful starry night, and he heard a voice in his head which said, "My life is made out of the love of creation." And then sometime later he heard himself say, "Since ancient times you've lived among the stars." And suddenly Bily knew who he was and what his mission on this earth would be. And then he started to get these impulses from the storage banks, and he started to have these good memories which penetrated him and showed him the way that his life had to go. And Bily eventually wrote some of these experiences down. And to quote this writing, which is entitled How It All Began, it says, "I recognized that the light which the stars emitted was a light in the visible spectrum. However, the light of true love remains invisible, creational, and for all great time." Bily was looking up at this beautiful starry night one evening, and he felt this sense of longing for very distant and faraway worlds. And that young mind at 4 years old started to understand this concept called the creation. And he wrote that everything that exists in the whole universe is a manifestation of the might and the infinite and true love of the mighty universal consciousness, which is simply called the creation. Now, Bily had this experience when he was 3 or 4 years old, and he was growing up in Bily, Switzerland. And then if you fast forward to about 1975 or so, Bily meets for the first time in 1975 with a Plejaren woman named Semjase. And in the very beginning, Semjase would land her ship there in Switzerland in the daylight, walk out of her ship and sit down beside Bily under a tree, and she would say the most beautiful things in relation to the creation. She would say things like, love and wisdom go together, and that the creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. She explained that every human has within them a spirit that does not die or sleep. Even during our deepest sleep, it records all of our thoughts and motion, and it informs us whether our thoughts are correct if we have learned to pay attention to it. She said the human spirit is the seat of the infinite, and few are those who realize this, and that it takes sound logic and freedom from unreal teaching to open up the power of the human spirit. Now, the human spirit is a tiny pinpoint of energy that exists in your midbrain. The midbrain is that area between the left and right lobe. It's called the superior colliculus, which consists of, well, actually the midbrain has within it the tectum, and it has the inferior and superior colliculus within it. And in some non-mammal species, fish and birds, the tectum is one of the largest components of the brain. In the human being, the superior colliculus is what deals with your eye movements and certain multisensory integrations. Well, in that superior colliculus is that tiny electrical thing called your human spirit. That's the real you. That's the part of you which survives death. So when you die, that human spirit comes out of your body and it goes into this band of energy that exists around our planet, and it exists in the same physical area that we do, but in another dimension. And your previous life memories will be taken by this universal consciousness and placed into what's called the storage banks. The universal consciousness is the consciousness, the superintelligence which created our universe. The physical universe is the material manifestation of the wisdom of the creation of the universal consciousness. It's a neutral, positive spirit. It is not anthropomorphic. It doesn't become angry. It's not jealous. It doesn't get involved in human wars. It has no personality, but it radiates love. And it has great wisdom. And one of the functions of this universal consciousness is storing human memories in this universal storage bank. So, in between lives, we prepare for the next life, and eventually that human spirit that's been with you your whole life is placed back into the body of a child 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg. And then you'll go through your next life receiving impulses from the storage bank and inspiration from your previous life memories. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in about 4 minutes. This song is called Sea of Glass, and it's off of the Living Water CD. You're listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We're talking about the Bily Meier case. We're talking about the human spirit. Before I get back to that, I want to remind you all that I'll be on Revolution Radio this evening at 8 p.m. speaking with Frosty Wooldridge about his book, America on the Brink. We're going to be talking about overpopulation and some of the incredible dangers associated with overpopulation. But let me get back to our discussion this afternoon, which is we've been talking about Merlin, the Druid prince, and how he studied the Meier material. And we've been talking about King Arthur, and we got back again onto the spiritual teachings as we often come back, and we're talking about the human spirit, which is, even though the size of the spirit is no larger than a needle point, its energy is enormous and it spreads out evenly like a filigree web over all parts of the human body, inside and out, without losing one iota of its power. And with its spirit energy, it brings life into every cell of the human body. I want to talk about the most ancient spirit form that was ever in a human body today. The Nocodamian spirit form was and is the only ever of its kind in relation that it animated and enlivened a human as the universal prophet and the herald of the truth of the creational natural laws and recommendations. From the first pure spirit level, respectively from the first pure spirit level of Arahat Atharasata, where it returned into a material body to incarnate. There are 7 evolutionary steps that human spirit forms go through while they're on the path of their evolution back to the creation. Remember, the universal consciousness creates human spirits as a part of its own evolution. So we're put here in a material body for the first time with almost no wisdom whatsoever, and that's called primitive life. And most of all the human spirit forms on the earth today, I would say, have evolved past primitive life, or they're moving into stage 2. Probably a few stragglers are just moving into stage 2, maybe some tribal people in parts of Africa or parts of Australia are still in the first stage, moving to the second. But most human spirits in their evolutionary pattern are in the second stage, which is called rational life. Mostly we can think rationally as human beings on the earth, and we don't always behave rationally, but we have the ability to behave rationally. And most of our human society on earth is in the second stage of spiritual evolution. Some of us have perhaps evolved to the third stage, which is intelligent life. Certainly, probably some of our scientists have done that. But at the fourth stage of human life, something very, very amazing happens. We start to become true space travelers, and we start to master some of these creational natural laws, and we conquer space and we conquer time. And for example, we build spacecraft which can actually leave the material belt of our universe, the physical material belt, and kind of go out of into another layer called the I think it's called the transformational belt, and jump from star to star and rematerialize light years away in another star system. Now this is in stage 4. We become true space-faring people. Semyase's people, the Plejaren, are true spacefaring people. Some of her people are even evolved into the 5th stage, which is life and creational wisdom. And certain kings of wisdom evolve into this stage of human life. So the Plejaren, Bily's main contacts are the Plejaren, not the Pleiadians. They've been called the Pleiadians before, but they don't live in our Pleiades. They live some 80 light years beyond our Pleiades in a different space-time and configuration. And they're a higher evolved human race. But they've had their own people on the Earth before. And we talked about that today. As late as 500 AD, a Plejaren woman named Keridwena had been involved with a man named Merlin and gave him a device that we'll simply call the lightning sword for lack of a better word. So these people from this other star system have been involved with humans here on Earth tangentially for thousands of years. They founded a civilization called Atlantis and Lemuria 133,000 years ago. So our society, our Earth, has been populated by human beings in the 4th stage of evolution. Now, our society has been blown up a couple of times. First, when a king of wisdom named Pelagon had a society here, which, after he died, destroyed itself. And second, when Atlant and his wife Keridwena started a city called Atlantis, and eventually the city of Mu was built by Muras. And that society destroyed itself about 11.5 thousand years ago. So the society that we have today is climbing out of the rubble of Atlantis and Lemuria. We're no longer a 4th-stage society. We've been thrown back almost to the Stone Age. We were pretty much thrown back to the Stone Age. And we had to relearn, we had to evolve again. And we've evolved since 11.5 thousand years ago, and now we're about to go into stage 3, intelligent life, without the necessary spiritual growth again. And that's why this spirit form has incarnated here on the Earth to put in place this information once again, and Bily's mission this time is to record it in written form. So as the 3rd millennium continues to unroll, as this time of confusion and maliciousness spreads over the Earth, we still have this ancient universal teaching to hold on to allow us to survive the storm. And the storm is coming. There is a slowly approaching global collapse that's talked about in the Goblet of Truth. And this global collapse is because our spiritual evolution has fallen behind our technological evolution. We don't know who we are, we don't know where we come from, and we don't know the meaning of our lives. We don't know what the purpose of our life is. And the purpose of our life is to gain wisdom from all of these lifetimes in the material. We're supposed to gain wisdom and move through these 7 stages of evolution. So here we are on the Earth, once again, struggling back into the 3rd stage of evolution. What has happened, unfortunately, in the third millennium is that our civilization has become an aberration. An aberration is something that hasn't evolved along correct and normal lines. An aberration is an abnormality. You could think of an aberration in terms of a mental illness, a hallucination, a delusion. And we've evolved without the necessary respect for nature and creation. So we continue to desecrate nature and destroy nature because we do not understand that we all live in a tightly woven web of life. That's much like you can think of threads of yarn. They're woven together where one goes underneath the other. And there's this wonderful passage called What the Truth Knows to Say, which describes the creation in a beautiful way. And it says that rivers, lakes, streams, stones, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form. And these spirit forms are on a journey through time which involve many, many lifetimes. And that death is just the passage to rebirth. Rebirth into the world of pure spirit. Now, when we move back into the world of pure spirit, we can spend maybe 150 years there. It probably will be less because of overpopulation on the earth. And then the universal consciousness will take your human spirit and place it back into the midbrain of a child. The universal consciousness will work together with the comprehensive consciousness block to give you a new material consciousness. And your previous life memories will be placed in your subconscious. And then while you grow back up as a child again, you'll get impulses from the storage banks. And you'll get inspiration from your previous life memories. And that's the way wisdom is passed from lifetime to lifetime. Now, Simyase, again, when she would meet with Bily in around 1975 to 1979, she would talk about the creation. And she would say that where there is wisdom and love, there is love and cognition. And where there is cognition and love, there is creation. Growth within love and wisdom teach the human to recognize creation. So we here in the third millennium start to need to recognize creation again. The problem is we live in a society that is a consciousness-conditioned tyranny. We have a society that enforces a kind of narrow-mindedness. Our consciousness is our awareness of ourselves and our surroundings. There is a tyranny that is trying to limit your consciousness. And it uses a force to keep you from understanding your history, from understanding what the purpose of our life is, because a spirit form that has no frame of reference is easily manipulated. And our individual evolutionary level is decisive. And it's, to a degree, influenced on our predecessor personalities. So each lifetime, we are meant to evolve as far as we can spiritually. And the problem is that's been short-circuited on the earth by this consciousness-based tyranny that really goes all the way back to the Giza intelligences and can be traced up through the revived earth, through the Roman Empire, and then eventually through the Roman Catholic Church, and where the Inquisition started. Remember, the auto de fe is where they used to burn people at the stake that have a different view of the world than the state religion at that time, which was Catholicism. Now, there are actually countless billion universes. Now, we live in one that's in the first stage of its evolution. Our universal consciousness is in the first stage of its evolution. And we still have a material belt. Every universe goes through 10 to the 49th power stages of evolution. And these are extremely long periods of time. And what happens is the universe expands out to some maximum, and then it starts its contraction phase. And it contracts completely, and then there's another Big Bang, and the universe goes into its next level of evolution. Now, this takes hundreds of trillions of years, 316 trillion years, for this evolutionary cycle, the expansion and the contraction, to take place. Now, our spirit forms are designed to go through these 7 stages of evolution, through a period in the material life, and then a period back in the spiritual, and a period in the material life, and a period back into the spiritual. Now, what should be happening on the earth is we should be moving back into the 4th and 5th stages of evolution. But because we've gone off the wrong path of evolution, and because our society is now become an aberration, spirit forms are not evolving spiritually the way they should in each lifetime. And that is because of this consciousness-based tyranny, and because of these religions, these fanatical religions that exist on the earth. But we still have a chance, and all of these prophecies don't have to come to the forefront. We still have opportunity to evolve, and it depends on every individual taking the time to learn the material that I cover in this show, to focus on the Meier material, to focus on meditation, to focus on learning to control your thoughts, to get in touch with your innermost self, to learn to feel the knowledge, the love, and the wisdom impulses that come from creation, which flow into our spirit form and into our subconsciousness and into our consciousness. So the whole point is developing your inner self through wisdom and through knowledge. And that is the point of our life. That's the point of our evolution. Now, the problem is, on the earth today are so many non-creational thinking human beings which are functioning under the material intellect. And the material intellect is focused on things like pride and status, and on things like thirst for adventure, and all of these kind of things. And this has caused a great slowdown in our evolution here on the Earth. Well, I think we've covered some rather interesting material on this show. I hope you will join me this evening on Revolution Radio. That's at freedomslips.com. Well, we've been talking about overpopulation, and that's the reason we're overpopulated here on the Earth is because we don't understand the creation. We don't understand our connection to it. And because of that, we continue to destroy the natural world. And I have a guest on this evening which will give us some more information about overpopulation. I hope you've enjoyed this episode this afternoon where we've talked about Bily, Meier, Merlin, King Arthur, Keridwena, and we never made it to the Holy Grail. That'll probably be for the next show. I hope you've enjoyed this evening or this afternoon, and we'll talk later. You're listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you this evening on freedomslips.com.